Welcome everyone. Just remember, before we get started, if you want to download the project links, it will be down below in the description. Just all you got to do is enter your email and it's completely free. Welcome back everyone to this video. In this video, we'll be attempting to complete our inventory system. Now, we haven't even started, so we're going to have to get started right away. Now, what we're going to do is in our GUI here, we're going to create a new folder called inventory. And we're also going to have in that inventory a new thing called resources. There we go. And inside that folder, we're going to start creating resources. So, okay, what are resources though? Well, it's a resource that is essentially going to contain information. It's kind of think of it as a nice little script that will hold information, but it's more of a dynamic script. So, okay, the first thing we'll do is maybe create a sword, for example. Now here we have a new script area and nothing else. Now we need a script for this. So in our scripts, let's go to player GUI and we can create a new script and we can call this item data. Now in here, we'll create a bunch of things. So we're gonna create a class and this is gonna be called a class name item data. Now, this has to extend a resource. So it extends resource because, well, it's a resource. And now what we can do is we are going to export a bunch of things. So we're going to export variable type, and this is going to be a custom-made thing that we make. So type is going to be something that we create. It's going to be an enumerator type, type like this. And then we're going to have a bunch of things in here. So we can have head for the head, right? Chest, we'll have legs, we'll have feet, and we'll have weapon. Now you can adjust the weapon to be right-handed and left-handed, but I'm just going to have weapon as a whole thing. So you can kind of put it in either hand, essentially. We'll have accessory, and lastly, main. Now the main is going to act as the inventory itself, and the rest are equipments, essentially. Okay. Now let's copy-paste these exports. We'll do like this, and we're going to change a few of these. So the first one we're going to want is an item name, and this is going to be a string. The next one is going to be item damage, and this is going to be an integer. Next, we're going to have item defense, because if you recall, we created a defense. Next, we're going to have a description, and this is going to be a string. But the cool part about this is that instead of just export, I can export multi-line. And you'll see what this looks like in just a second. Lastly, we're going to have the item texture. And we're going to replace this with texture 2D. Now, I believe we're actually going to need some items, which I will link you some things in the description down below. Okay, let's remove that type. You'll find a few resources for the items, but I'm just going to have these three things right here that I have for my own, and you can find whatever and use those as textures. Okay, let's continue the resource thing. So now we have our script that exports a bunch of things. We even have an enumerator, but how do we do this? Well, in our sword, if we go to the script and drop and drag our item data, we now can see a bunch of things that pop up. Now this is the multi-line and this is the regular string. So now we can import or bring in one of the textures. We can give it a description, say this is a wooden sword. We can give it defense, maybe just 1 to test it out, 5 for the damage, and then item name, wooden sword. And the type would be a weapon. So this is pretty neat. We essentially have a very dynamic resource. Now, the cool thing about this is that if I take my sword and I duplicate it and I make a shield, for example, I can go to my shield or my shield resource, open this up, and you can see here it says shield. So I can start renaming things to wooden shield. The damage, we can say 0. Defense, we can say 5. Description, we can say this is a wooden shield. And the type will keep it as a weapon because it is kind of a weapon, like it goes into your hands, right? And then for the texture, we can of course put in the wooden shield. Okay, now we want to actually implement things into our game because we have these resources, we have these things, but it doesn't do anything on its own. So we want to be able to actually load them in and stuff. So, okay, let's create a new script here for our inventory. To our scripts, player, GUI, and we can create a new folder here. Now we can just put it in here, it doesn't really matter. We'll create, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save all or close all, so that way my scripts are a bit more organized. And now I'm going to delete all this and say variable items to load. And we're going to customize this to load the items ourselves. So you obviously wouldn't do this in an actual game, but this is something we're going to do just to test it out essentially. So let's load in our resources here. So we can load our sword and then load in our shields. So to the next line, we can just load in our shield. And now we can create a function ready. And we can say for I in 24, we're going to create a new item called slots. Colon, and then we're going to create something called an inventory slot. Now this is going to be a class that we make, and you'll see what a class is in just a second. But that is essentially how many slots we'll have. We'll have 24 slots. Okay. Now we want to load our slots in with our items. So we'll say for loop in items to load dot size, and then we can say var I is equal to inventory item dot new. Now the inventory item will be from the actual resource. Should be. So inventory data. No, that's going to be something else. Sorry about that. So the class itself is going to be something that we create, and it's going to allow us to create a new object. So let's take a look at what this means, because I could say a bunch of gibberish and none of it might even make sense. Okay, so in our scripts folder for our GUI, yes, we'll create here. In fact, we'll move that in. And in here, we'll create a new script, and we'll call this inventory slot. And then we'll create another one. Let me just double check which one we'll need. Inventory item, that's the one. So we'll say new script, inventory item. I think I misspelled it. Yeah, I did. Let me rename it. Inventory item, and just capitalize it, inventory item. Okay, now let's open these up and have these open on our side here. Let's close all and then open them up again. So we have all 4 of these scripts that we're going to play around in. Okay, now in our inventory slot, we're going to do this. We're going to class name inventory slot and then create a panel container as our base. Now, what does this do though? What is this class name? Well, essentially what I'll be doing is this should hopefully unerror. Essentially what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going into my nodes here, and I can actually search up inventory slot, and you can see it's a new node that I've created. And I'm going to be creating this every time, 24 times essentially, in here. This is creating 24 new slots, new nodes. Now, we're going to have to put stuff into these slots, right? But we'll do that in just a second. So let's do the inventory item now, because the item itself also needs to have a class, right? Now this will be class name inventory item, and this will extend the texture rectangle, because this will be the data of the actual item, right? So this is the physical object of the actual item that we'll put into everything. Okay, so in here, we're going to have a few functions. The first one we want to do is export the data. So we're going to have the data of the item data, which is the, here we go, the resource that we used. Remember, so this is the information of the actual item, right? Now in the ready function, so I'm going to be copy pasting a little bit because this is going to go a little faster this way, but I'll still explain all the code as we go along. So first, we're going to check to see if data is valid. If it is, what we'll do is we will expand the mode to be the texture rectangle expand ignore size. We're going to stretch the mode, and then we're going to put in the texture of the data item. And then we're also going to tooltip the texture. If you're wondering what tooltip is, you'll kind of see it in a minute, but tooltip is essentially if I hover over something, this will pop up as the text. So we're going to essentially show the information of the stats, the damage, and the defense. Okay. Now, what we want to do is initialize the data itself into D. Okay, so we want to initialize this object essentially. Next, we're going to use a built-in function called getDragData, and we're going to be able to get the drag data with our own custom-made function called makeData, makeDragPreview. So this function will essentially get the information of the data and pop it into the texture. Okay, so we're going to be creating a new texture and make a preview of that item. So this will allow us to kind of give a illusion that I'm dragging something out of my inventory. So when I drag and drop something, this is where that's happening. It's creating a new texture and getting the information of the current texture and then popping it into this new one that I just created. And the position will adjust it depending on where my mouse is, which is automatically done with this function, right? So add position, set drag preview, get the position. Okay. Now, what about the slot? The slot itself is also going to need some things. In here, this will have an export type of the item data types. Okay. So we could have repeated the same thing from the item data, but instead I can just have it all in here. So that way, if I ever change anything, it'll automatically change this as well. All right, next, we want to initialize the type and the vector, okay? All right, next, we can create two helper functions. One is going to be a canDropData. Now, this is going to be a little thick, but we'll try to go through it together. We're going to for loop, or loop kind of, not loop, but if data is in the inventory, we're going to check to see if the data that we have is in the inventory item. Then we'll also check to see if the type is in the main. Now this is checking to see if the item or the type is a regular slot. Now you'll see why this main matters in just a second, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to check to see if it's a main. Now if it is, and the child count is 0, we'll just return true. Because if it's 0, that means there's nothing in the slot. That means we can drop the data. Now, if it's also otherwise, we can check for the type. And if the type is the same, we can also return true. But we also want to... never mind. I lost my train of thought there. We'll also check to see, we're not going to check, but this is a check to see if this is another case. If the data's parent is type, if this is the same as the current type of this inventory slot. Now, we're also, if this doesn't happen, then this will happen, right? We're going to return the child's data equal to the data type of this data. Otherwise, we'll do the same thing, but just of the data type in this inventory slot. Now, if all of this fails, we'll just return false, meaning we can't drop anything into this slot. But usually this shouldn't happen, or we don't want this to happen. Most likely this will only happen if, well, we're not on a slot, right? So, okay, what about the actual dropping of the data? Now, the dropping of the data is going to be a little tricky because what we're going to do is we're going to also start adjusting stats. Now, in here, we're going to check to see if the child count is greater than 0. If the child count is greater than 0, that means there is an item currently in that slot. If there's an item in that slot, we're going to create the item, or not create, but get access to that item. And we're going to do this. We're going to get our player. So if you remember from our GUI, our profile, this is how we get access to the player. So we'll have to do that inside of here as well, in our inventory slot at the top. So in player, we can say player 0, and then health. Now, this is to get access to the health of the player. So what we can do is instead of the health, because we don't actually have anything that adjusts the health, we'll adjust the damage. So we can say minus equals the item dot data dot item damage. So we're going to adjust the item damage of our player and the defense. Okay. Okay. Now at this point, we have this because if we have an item in our slot, I want to take out the information from our item. So you'll kind of see what it means, what this does when I actually create the GUI. But this will essentially take away the stats that I currently have equipped. And then what we can do is check to see if item is equal to the data. And if it is, then we'll return. And then we can item reparent the data with the get parent. So this essentially switches the current node on top of the one I currently have, right? So it switches the items being equipped. Now, another thing we need to check for is if the item data is not equal to type main, then what we want to do is copy paste this, but instead of subtract, we're going to add, because this means I'm equipping something. Now, if I am equipping something, then I just add it, right? That's that simple. Now here I can say else, and I want to take an item out. So I would actually do the same thing here and just subtract. Now, out of all of these in the end, we can, instead of item here though, we're going to say data. And then in the end, what I can do is just reparent self. So this will reparent the actual item I'm holding, and this will reparent whatever item is in the slot already. Okay. Okay, so this should work with our stats and should allow us to switch items in our slots. Okay, let's just double check we have everything done. The only thing we really need done now is the actual GUI, right? So we're going to have to do that in just a second. But yeah, now in our inventory, let's finish this. So here, what we'll do is we're going to initialize the slot to be a main, because our slots should be all main, right? It's our inventory slots. And we're going to give it the size 32 by 32. And then I'm going to get the grid, which we don't have yet. But I'm going to get the grid, which is the inventory, and add child. Now for the items themselves, to add an item, we're going to item initialize, load the items. So this one, whichever item I'm loading, which we're doing both of them. And then we're going to get a child from our grid and just add it in there. Okay, so this is essentially how we add an item. So, okay, now we need things in our actual scene. So what we can do here is actually add our inventory slots. And in these inventory slots, we can use these as whatever I want, right? So I can now give it a custom minimum size of 32 by 32. And then I can adjust where I want it to be. So I'm going to put it right around there. And if I go back to the GUI, I can see that my inventory will be right around there. So I can adjust that accordingly. And this I'll rename to legs slot. And now we change this to legs. And now what we want to do is duplicate this a bunch of times. And now we can just adjust each of these. And I might actually turn on the grid so it's a little easier. And essentially all we want to do now is create our equipment stuff. So here we can just start dragging things away and, making our little thing pretty. So let's see which one is which. Okay, so this one, make this one over here. Okay, so this will be our weapon. So we'll change this to weapon. We'll change this to feet. And we'll rename these to feet slot. We'll take this one. This is going to be the leg slot. So that one can be the legs. I'll move that to the bottom, and then the feet right below that. And then this one will be the head. So I can move that to the top, change this to head. This is the chest. So I can change this to chest slot. I'm going to rename this to head slot as well. This one over here, this is a weapon. So I can say weapon, we can say left hand slot. And then this one, lastly, is right hand slot. I can move the head slot right above and make sure that the right hand is also a weapon. And of course, if you'd like accessories, you can add those too. but I think this is good enough for what we want to do. Now I want to create a grid item. Now, what is a good container for this? Well, there's actually something called a grid container, and this is actually perfect for what we want to do. So I'm going to create this grid container right here, right next to my equipment. And the columns, I'm going to say 6, because I'm going to be filling in 24 inventory slots. So, we'll have 4 by 6 inventory now. Okay, now in here though, I'm going to actually go to theme override and increase the separation because this will allow us to create a nicer looking inventory. So I'm going to do 16 and 16 here. All right, now we'll test it. So let's see if this works, or it's going to not work actually, because what we want to do is call this grid and then right click this, and we'll call this access as unique name. Now, if you're wondering, that's what this is, because you might have noticed that this isn't a, whatever this is called, a star button, but it's a percent key, right? This means it's accessing the name grid as a unique name, right? So here I've made it a unique name. So now if I try, let's see if we can test this. All right, we got an error. Let's see what's happening. All right, I'm gonna figure out what is going on and I'll be right back. All right, so for some reason, the resource sword did not save the script properly. So what I ended up doing is reloading the project itself, and then I had to reload the script properly, and now everything works properly. So let me show you some bugs and some things that do work. So, okay, here's our profile. We can now drag in something into our slot, and it does work, and it kind of works if I drag it out. You can see that it becomes 2 again, right? And we can even see that this works. So I believe if we go over here and attack him, he should just die in 1 hit. Now, the problem is if I, 2 things. If I replace this like this, it becomes negative, right? So that's one issue. Another issue is if I'm in an inventory, right? So in the inventory itself, if I swap these, then it starts to also reduce stats when it shouldn't. So the main issue, obviously, is right here, right? Specifically this one, because in this one, it doesn't know if I'm dragging something inside of the inventory to another inventory thing, or if I'm switching something from my equipped items into a non-equipped items. So I might fix this in the future, in future lectures. I kind of want to leave it up to you, but if you guys want me to fix this, let me know in the comments down below if this is something you guys would like to see. It's not too difficult. It's just I kind of want to challenge you guys to try to fix this yourself, because you don't want to just copy paste code and try to take everything on your own. You want to try to play around with it a little bit on your own and see if you can, adjust it to whatever you want to do. So I'll kind of leave this as the end of this video. So we have a relatively working inventory system. And so yeah, in the next video and the future ones, we will start working on our quest, which obviously we have nothing in there yet. So we'll start working on our quest, including an AI NPC guy. So we'll start working on that as well. I'll see you all in the next video.